Welcome to this week's Rally Round Rochester. I'm your host, Beth Adams, and we're here every week, and we are talking, as we do every week, with individuals and organizations that make a real difference in the lives of our community members. And this day, we're going to be talking with Sally Bacchetta. She is a Rochester area resident. She's an award-winning writer, a sales training consultant, and she's done medical writing, magazine journalism, corporate communications, and she's also the Rochester Adoptive Families Examiner. And she and her articles have appeared in national magazines and local publications, and she's written a book about her experience as an adoptive parent. It's called What I Want My Adopted Child to Know, an Adoptive Parent's Perspective. Sally, it's so good to meet you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Beth. It's nice to be here with you.
Your story in the book starts out by saying you never intended, as a younger person, to become an adoptive parent.
Absolutely. I come from a very large family, and I just always assumed that I would grow up, get married, and have lots of children. And it was quite a shock to find out that I had some infertility issues and was not going to be able to have children. So it was quite a process dealing with that and healing from that and getting to a place where I was ready to consider adoption. And boy, I'm glad I did. It's been an amazing journey.
You have 2 adopted children now.
Yes, we do. We have a daughter who is almost 5. She's 4 3/4, she'll tell you. And a son who just turned 1. And we adopted both of them domestically as infants.
Mm-hmm. How did you decide to go the domestic route? And what options in regarding adoption did you look at when you were looking?
You know, that's a great question. That's a large piece of the adoption journey is determining how you want to go about it. We chose domestic because it was very important to us to be able to have an open adoption. My husband and I both feel like our children's birth families are their families. That's their beginning. And if we had adopted internationally, it's just a different way to go about it. You can help children internationally who are orphans, and so there's that whole end of it, but you really don't have any contact with the birth family. So often the children really have no idea exactly where they came from, and there's not an opportunity for them to stay connected with their birth family. So that was something that was very important to us, and so that's why we chose domestic.
So that really is an intensely personal choice. So, I imagine some people wouldn't want to have the open adoption, but how does an open adoption work?
It works. There are many different ways of doing open adoption as there are people who adopt. Mm-hmm. The term open really just means that there is some degree of contact. With our daughter's birth mother, our first adoption, we send cards or pictures and letters a couple times a year. We don't have face-to-face contact with her. With our son's birth mother, we actually see her at least once a year. We exchange emails frequently. So we have a lot more contact with her. Openness specifically just means there is some contact. And then it's up to both families to determine what's going to work best for all of them.
Mm-hmm. And how did you come together with the birth parents? How did they choose you or you choose them?
It's a really interesting piece. We went through an agency called Friends in Adoption that operates out of Vermont, but they do adoptions all across the country. And when you adopt, most times you put together a profile, which is a personal resume. You assemble pictures of yourselves. I wrote a letter about my husband, about why I think he would be a good father. He wrote one about me. And when a birth mother contacts an agency, she tells them some idea of what she's looking for, and they supply her with a supply of profiles. And she looks through and reads them and decides, geez, I'd like to meet this couple, or these people, I think I'd like to know more about them. So that's the selection process. And often people who are considering adoption ask me, how do I write a great profile? You know, I want to be chosen quickly. And I tell them the most important thing is to make your profile represent you. I've seen some profiles with people skiing in Zurich, and here they are at, in Italy, and it was kind of intimidating. We don't do that. We're kind of here, and we're simpler people than that. But that's why it's so important to write a profile that's true to who you are, because then the right birth mother will find you.
Right. Hearing you describe that journey makes me remember what it was like in the whole dating thing. Just be yourself and the right person will come to you. That's kind of how it works.
You're right. It's a lot like that, because as time goes on, when you're waiting longer and longer for an adoption, you start tweaking your profile and thinking, maybe I'm not putting the right vibe out there. Maybe I should be more of this or more of that. And you're exactly right, though. You end up hooking up temporarily with the wrong people.
Right.
Whereas if you just stay true to who you are, the right situation really works out, as you know yourself.
And as you write about so eloquently, these children, were meant to be your children.
Absolutely. And that's part of having the patience and the faith, waiting for the right situation. My daughter and I, our personalities are so much alike in so many ways. And when I met her birth mother, I almost fell over. She could be my younger sister, and It was astounding. And she and I had so many interests the same, and that's why she chose us, because she felt like we were a lot like her and her family, and that's what she wanted for her daughter.
That's wonderful. So this book, Sally, What I Want My Adopted Child to Know, this is essentially a lovely letter to both of your children. Why did you want to talk to them about their adoption in the form of a book?
I felt like I had to, Beth. It wasn't so much a want as something that I really felt compelled to do, because as much as parenting is the same when you're an adoptive parent, it is different in profound ways. And I think it's dangerous. Sometimes people try to act as if it is the same as biological, and it isn't. The love is just as strong, and the bond is just as strong. So I don't mean that. There's no lessening, but there are different things about it. My children come to me with their birth families in their hearts. I'm not the first woman who loved my children. There's another woman who nurtured their lives inside her body. That's profound, and that's in my kids somewhere. And I think it's so important to acknowledge that and to honor that. And I think that's a gift that my children have, that my husband and I as parents have to keep in our awareness and respect that in everything that we do with them. We were chosen to be their parents. It's an incredible honor.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about that in the earliest chapters, why you chose adoption, why you came together with these specific children, your children, and what that has meant to you as a parent. And you have a chapter I love that's called We Really Are Your Parents. You don't have to wonder about this. We really are mom and dad.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an important part of the balancing act. A lot of adoptive parents struggle with balance. I think all parents struggle with balance, but that's one specific issue, is making sure your children know you are their parents. You're not going anywhere. You're not going to give them back. They are part of your family as much as you are. But the balance is also acknowledging and honoring that they have a first family, a family that came before you, and letting that be important to your children when it's important to them, and letting them not talk about their birth family when they don't want to.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, Sally, you think about all of the potential issues that could come up in their mind as they go through their childhood and even their adulthood. And you have such an amazing insight into that from their perspective, never having experienced that yourself.
Thank you, Beth. I really appreciate that. That means a lot to me. It's a very intimate process, and I have drawn on my background in psychology and child development, and I'm a great observer of people, and I have talked to a lot of birth mothers, a lot of adoptees, and tried to gain some perspective, because I think it's going to be important for my children that I understand their journey, because their journey of adoption is completely different than mine. Mm-hmm.
You say that you want them to know that you regret there's certain things you can't give them.
Yes.
As their adopted mom. What is that? What are those things?
Those are things that, although we have some openness with their birth family, it's not complete openness. There are certain things I don't know about their birth families, and they don't have daily contact with the woman who loved them first. I know very little about both of my children's birth fathers, and those aren't issues for them right now. As I said, my daughter is only almost 5, and my son just turned 1. That's not even on their radar yet. But as they mature, and especially as they enter adolescence, that's a time when all children start to question their identity and who am I and who do I want to be. And for kids who were adopted, that's just another layer to that whole thing. And there's some answers I will never be able to give them as much as I love them. And I think it's important for adoptive parents to be okay with that and to let their kids know, honestly, there's some things I just can't give you, but I love you and I'm here and I'll give you everything that I can and we'll work out the rest together.
Your son and daughter are still quite young, obviously. But as you say, they have an open adoption and they know that there are these other folks who were their birth parents. How do you explain that to a 4-year-old or a 2-year-old? What kind of language do you use when they're very, very young about that?
Well, I think of it as adopted children should never remember a time when they didn't know they were adopted.
Right.
I think that should come as naturally to them as learning their own name and learning to recognize their parents' faces. And I would say my 1-year-old is pointing to everything now, and so we're labeling things. When he points to a car, we say car. We don't tell him how the engine works.
Right.
So it's the same kind of a thing. As long as we've been talking to our daughter about names and who's in our family, we've mentioned her birth mother's name and her birth father's name. And as she's gotten a little older, she's starting to ask questions. Where does my birth mother live? What does she look like? So I think you let the child lead. It's like talking to them about sex or anything else.
Right.
You let them lead.
When they ask the question, they're ready for the answer.
Exactly.
Right. Well, you say that you think about their birth parents all the time because they're not just important to these children who they gave life to. They're so important to your life. They changed your life.
They did. And sometimes I think I'm obsessed with my kids' birth parents, but I figure as long as I don't act on it, it's okay. It's a private obsession. But yeah, they're with me all the time in my mind and in my heart. And I really think, Beth, that they make me a better mother because I am very aware of having been chosen. And I think that's a big responsibility. They could have chosen anybody, someone they knew, someone they went to school with, someone else's profile. They chose me and my husband, and they trusted us to raise their children. And so it really makes me a better mother. It makes me more patient, and it makes me give my kids better guidance, I think.
Do you ever think about the days during adolescence, and I'm sure every adopted kid has probably thought this, like, you're not my real mother. I don't like that punishment. I'm going to go find my birth mother and father.
I do think about that. And I think that's another reason why parents should be open with their kids from the beginning. It kind of takes some of the toxicity out of that statement. And then it just puts it more in the realm of, I'm just being a teenager. This is what I can throw at you. And our position is when our children are 18, if they want to pursue more openness with their birth parents, we would completely support them. Until that time, then the answer is going to be, yeah, too bad. I'm your mom. Your birth mother chose me to be your mom, and you're not going to like everything I say. That's your life, and keeping the birth parents in the role that they are in my kid's life, because that's what the birth parents chose. And I think that's important for adoptive parents to remind their children. Nobody did this to you. Nobody did this to your birth parents. You weren't taken away from them. They chose this. They made the decision in your best interest. This is the life they wanted you to have.
Right. And it's really an act of love. I can understand where a very young child might think, oh my goodness, my birth parents abandoned me. But what they did was the most loving thing they could do for their children.
You're absolutely right. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions I think people have about birth parents. And I spend a lot of time educating people about that. If you talk to birth mothers, it's heartbreaking. They grieve for decades, and the grief never really goes away. And to me, it's the most motherly thing you can do, is to put your child's needs before your own. And I just think it's the epitome of a maternal sacrifice to know, as much as you love this baby and you want to raise it, it's not the best thing for the child. And so to let them go into a better life, I find that very inspiring.
Mm-hmm.